Today, we will delve into the history of pirates, analyze existing stereotypes, and discuss one of the most legendary pirates in history, Blackbeard. We will explore why pirates chose cats over parrots and shed light on some of the torture methods they employed. All of this we will discuss in the next few minutes. The story of Blackbeard begins in 1680 in Britain. Like with most pirates, little is known about Edward Teach's past. There are different opinions about his origin. Some claim he was an orphan, while others believe he was born into a wealthy family. Despite the fact that many drawings and depictions of pirates often portray them as barbarians, Teach's name is associated with numerous letters and records of negotiations with merchants. This suggests that he was a much more complex and intriguing personality than may initially appear. As for his pirate career, it was brief, lasting only 2 years, half of which Teach and his crew spent struggling for survival. However, his life story before this period is quite fascinating. He began his maritime service at an early age, just 12 years old, and by the time he reached 20, he was involved in the Franco-English War in the Caribbean basin. It's important to note that Teach was not a lone pirate. He started his pirate career as a subordinate to the renowned pirate Benjamin Hornigold. For many years, Teach aspired to rise in the pirate hierarchy and obtain his own ship. In 1716, he finally succeeded in acquiring his own vessel, which he named the Queen Anne's Revenge. This moment marked a turning point in his life, as it was when he actively cultivated the image of Blackbeard, a menacing and fearsome pirate. It's worth noting that all the attributes associated with his appearance, such as his repulsive countenance, odor, and intimidating beard, were fictional traits that Teach used to instill fear and achieve his goals. Nevertheless, this tactic proved successful, and many merchants, hearing rumors of Blackbeard, preferred to surrender and hand over their loot rather than risk a confrontation with him. Another common stereotype about pirates that popular culture often portrays is pirates as barbarians who raid ships and cause destruction and explosions on board. However, in reality, pirates preferred not to destroy potentially profitable ships. After all, why destroy a captured vessel and its contents when they could sell the loot and make a profit? As for Blackbeard, he followed the same principle. However, almost immediately after starting his pirate career in 1718, he imposed a blockade on one of the largest ports in the United States, Charleston. It's important to note that there were no spectacular explosions or executions here. Edward Teach simply demanded a ransom from the port authorities, threatening to destroy the port otherwise. The pirate received the ransom and safely sailed away. However, it's worth mentioning that the port owners were left resentful and offered a reward for the pirate's head. And although Edward Teach later attempted to legitimize himself and accept an amnesty in the same year, his fate ended tragically. In that same year, he was found with 5 gunshot wounds and 25 saber wounds. According to historical records, Blackbeard met his end at the hands of British Navy Lieutenant Robert Maynard. Interestingly, in a direct saber battle, Maynard couldn't defeat the legendary pirate, and some historians believe that Blackbeard was killed by an unnamed soldier who was also a member of his crew. Regardless of the circumstances, Blackbeard's place in history is undeniable. He earned his fame through his long pirate voyages that spanned several decades. He managed to command his own ship, which is a testament to his seamanship and combat skills. Another pirate myth is the notion of black marks and mysterious rituals attributed to captains. In reality, it was simpler and more rational. If a pirate was ineffective or undisciplined, their fate usually ended with a bullet to the heart or being thrown overboard. When the ship Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground, the captain made the decision to strand his crew on a deserted island to ensure their survival and rescue. Regarding Edward Teach's flag, it did not depict the Jolly Roger, which is often associated with pirates in pop culture. Instead, his flag featured an image of a skeleton, one hand holding an hourglass and the other piercing a heart with a spear. Additionally, Blackbeard's ships did not have parrots. The entire image of pirates and their attributes was romanticized in books, as there was a fashion for these exotic birds at the time. Parrots, despite their exoticism, would have been inconvenient companions for pirates. Perched on shoulders, they could occasionally soil their owner's clothing and shoulders. Pirates preferred cats as they were more practical companions and helped in the fight against rats on ships. Cats with extra toes were considered especially lucky, and their presence was believed to bring luck on board the ship. In 1996, the famous ship Queen Anne's Revenge, which belonged to Blackbeard, was discovered. Due to the immense popularity of pirates, the location of this ship was strictly concealed. Participants in the expedition exploring the ship exercised caution and care while extracting valuable artifacts. Among the findings was a pistol capable of firing not only bullets, but also bolts. This demonstrates how resourceful pirates were. In conditions of limited ammunition, they knew how to use whatever was at hand to keep their weapons combat ready. Pirates certainly couldn't afford to leave one-armed or one-legged crew members on board, as is sometimes depicted in movies. At best, such pirates became useless to the crew and were marooned on shore. At worst, to avoid carrying extra ballast, they could be thrown overboard. Various medical instruments were also found on the ship, such as enemas, scissors, silver needles, bloodletting devices, amputation clamps, and even a metal syringe. These items indicate that pirates did not forget about medical provisions on board and were prepared for medical treatment and surgical interventions if necessary. Among sailors, various diseases were widespread, including the dangerous syphilis, and treatment was not always straightforward. To treat syphilis, pirates used a syringe to administer mercury through the urethra, which may seem repulsive and painful. However, health was an important resource even for rough sailors, and Blackbeard did not neglect medical care for his crew. Furthermore, his ship had 3 experienced ship surgeons whom he acquired after capturing another vessel. These doctors received good pay for their services and were an integral part of the crew. This underscores that pirates, despite their roughness and cruelty, recognized the importance of medical provisions and were ready to care for the health of their crew in conditions where even minor illnesses or injuries could become fatal in the remote maritime expanses. We have already discussed torture on Blackbeard's ship, and as we noted, he was not particularly known for actively engaging in torture. However, there are stories of cruel torture methods associated with other pirates. The most famous of these methods were those involving a plank, on which a person with their eyes blindfolded was forced to walk towards the sea and often fell into the water, where they faced death either from drowning or from sharks. Yes, such methods did exist. However, this method was not as commonly used as many might think, and historians struggled for a long time to find sufficient historical evidence of its widespread use. Some cases are documented in chronicles. For example, in 1769, George Wood, while in prison, admitted to using the plank on English sailors. In 1829, the Times newspaper reported a similar execution on the ship Red Ball. It's worth noting, though, that walking the plank was more of an exception than a rule. Usually, simply lowering the enemy ship's flag was sufficient to make them surrender, and most of the time, the enemy didn't want to take unnecessary risks. Firstly, any prisoner was a potential ransom or even a future pirate, as they were sailors. Pirates were constantly dying in battles and from diseases, so they needed manpower. And secondly, death was a common occurrence in those times, and it was ultimately easier to throw someone overboard. In general, cases of torture among pirates were more associated with sadistic tendencies, and some captains of these crews, like Edward Lowe, were known for their particular cruelty and derived pleasure from torture. Lowe had instruments for torture in his arsenal, such as inserting candles between fingers and forcing victims to run around the mast until exhaustion. The common practice in the world of piracy was more rational behaviour. For example, a more widespread tactic was offering members of a captured ship a share of the loot and a place in their own crew. Sometimes, pirates even released those who refused to join them to maintain their reputation as honest bandits. These tactics allowed pirates to increase their ranks and obtain more loot with fewer losses. It's important to debunk one of the main myths about pirates, the idea that legendary figures like Blackbeard, Francis Drake and others didn't recruit escaped criminals, thugs and sadists into their crews. In reality, the majority of pirates of that time were former slaves, ordinary sailors and common labourers. This was because life at the time was extremely harsh, especially for sailors. Many of them were forcibly conscripted into the British Navy and were often even shackled to the deck during stops to prevent them from escaping. Before deciding to join the pirates, such people rarely thought twice about their choice because, in most cases, there simply were no alternatives to piracy. So many of them saw piracy as a chance for a better life and freedom from the harsh conditions they were forced to endure. Piracy, especially in the past, was a reprehensible business. However, it's important to understand that the circumstances were entirely different in those times. Compared to today, life was much more brutal. Take, for example, the case of John. His own country sent him aboard a ship where he suffered from syphilis and was condemned to a slow death. This happened centuries ago when a person's life was of little value and such cruelties were commonplace. It's no wonder that many people in such conditions chose the path of piracy. It was a means of survival and a fight for their own well-being.